Because I'm obviously interested in values and morals, being into Pirsig and all. I've been reading Genealogy of Morals very slowly by Friedrich Nietzsche, with help from some great YouTubers. The two people I'm using to learn this material are Dr. Gregory Sadler and Dr. Eric Dodson. And they are very helpful, and I'll put links below. I'm not through the whole thing, but I think I understand the first essay. There's 3 essays pretty well at this point, and it's a lot easier to understand, by the way, than Beyond Good and Evil, which I made my way through a couple of times, and I think that gave me a sense of what Nietzsche is about, I guess, at least a little bit. So I kind of have this embodied sense of what he's trying to say, and certainly, like I said, this is a lot easier to understand. So in the first essay, he explores the emergence of Christian or slave morality. He talks about a lot of things, but I'm just going to talk about this one part of the essay, because there's something that's really fascinating in this essay, and it relates to Pirsig. And there's 2 moralities. Let's say there's the master morality, which begins with the Homeric Greeks, the pre-Socratics, which is, of course, Arete. And in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, this representative of Arete, this Greek hero, just does everything well. He even dies well, and gives up his wife to, he's talking about giving his wife up to these forces that are going to come in and take over. And he does this in a heroic fashion, and everything is done right, let's just say, as a hero. So it means being good at whatever you do. You're not specializing, but if you're good at all manner of Greek endeavors that a warrior, a hero would engage in. And so the blonde beast, so to speak, is the warrior, this particular morality that takes what he wants. Eric Dodson is funny. He uses Paris Hilton as an example of this kind of master morality. For example, he said she can go to bed with a Greek billionaire and not feel bad about it, which is kind of hilarious. But that's a little bit different from what Pirsig is saying. He doesn't really go into, the downside, let's say, of the Greek warrior. He goes in. He's pretty much talking about just the excellence of that morality is about excellence. So the warrior with a morality of arete is a complete extrovert who doesn't reflect on anything. He just does. And when he speaks beautifully, but he doesn't mull around in his head about things. And this morality at one point begins to be countered by the priest, who is introverted. And from this introversion, which is developed as a counter, let's just say, to the extroversion of the warrior, because the priest is very intelligent, but he's not powerful, he's not vibrant, he's not active like the warrior, he's reflective. And this capacity for reflection develops his psyche, like an expansion. I think Nietzsche says like an expansion of a membrane that creates this depth, this space that did not exist before. And in the space, all manner of internal psychic workings can occur. So that's something that mankind did not engage in before this. And it's interesting, if you read Julian Jaynes' The Bicameral Mind, you'll see that this happens in the evolution of human consciousness. You have people who do and act and follow authority, but they don't think about who they are as individuals, let's just say. So this priest morality is where you start to get the sense of the individual who has his own thoughts and his own perspective that is not, of course, the warrior has his own thoughts and perspective, but it's in the service of excellence, whereas this becomes more of an individual thing. And it's interesting the way the expansion of the psychic space is described. It's stuff like this that just, when I read Nietzsche, it's so, it just sends me. Remember that? That's an old term. It sends me, because it's so deeply correct. It just lines up, with the way reality presents itself, with the way human beings present themselves. So this is a division that begins long ago, and we see it today, of course, in introverts and extroverts, but also the capacity to hate of another type. The priests hate the warriors because the warriors are more powerful, but the priests are more intellectual, and ultimately the priest's morality and that capacity to reflect and to hate and to feel resentment towards the warriors becomes the precursor to the slave morality down the line, this capacity to reflect on this level. The warriors don't hate the priests. They don't care. Nothing phases them because A, they don't have the capacity to feel bad about themselves because they don't have this capacity for self-reflection, but B, they're so powerful that nothing's intimidating to them, and they don't really need to develop this capacity for self-reflection. They're already set in the world. And Nietzsche says we are, of course, mostly the spawn of priests who end up, that morality ends up winning, and Nietzsche bemoans this. In modern times, the division can sort of be applied to people on the political left and right. On the right are the doers, the country boys, for example, who hunt and fish and drive trucks, listen to emotional country music, and obviously enjoy firearms. On the left are the college-educated, the intellectuals who feel resentment for the fact, like they may not be good at sports, but they are the student body president types. And I live in both the city and the country, and I see this division pretty clearly. Interestingly, what does not appear to be, one thing I want to say, let's go back to the hating, the resentment. This is a sort of division that occurs, say, in American high schools, where you've got the jocks and and the nerds. And so the jocks don't really care much about the nerds because they're, in the football team and all that stuff. And the nerds end up being very successful in the business and intellectual world. Because they're developing this capacity for that. And they end up having resentment, this long-standing resentment towards the jock types. You will certainly see this if your average city intellectual does have this sort of resentment for, you will often hear them talk about people in high school in that way. And like I said, because I'm in the city and country, I do see this division. Interestingly, what does not appear to be parallel to this division is the classic and romantic. And coming up in chapter 9 of Lila, I should probably save this for the commentary, but I'm not going to. There's enough to talk about. Pirsig explains why he abandoned this as the essential division of quality, because while quality could unite classic and romantic, it was not the best way to divide quality. Ultimately, we see quality can unite all sorts of things that are divided, things that he ends up calling platypi, because regular philosophy, subject-object metaphysics, can't unite these two things. They're opposed to each other, but quality does unite opposites. So what ends up being the division of quality is the dynamic creative force and the static stabilizing force. So while this division is related to classic and romantic, it's different. It's inclusive. Whereas classic and romantic are not. So let's take the two moralities, the warrior morality representing dynamism and change, and the priest morality representing stability, custom, cultivation, and fixing of social and intellectual patterns. So this is something he said in describing why he had to abandon this division. American Indian mysticism is the same platypus in a world divided primarily into classic and romantic patterns as under subject and object division. So a platypus, which we're going to talk about, is something that just doesn't fit in subject object metaphysics. If everything is made of substance, then how does art and science how do they unite? They can't. But if everything's made of value, they obviously value creates the values of art and the values of science. The underlying value itself, the valuing, is the same thing. So everything is contingent on valuing to actually manifest. Let me continue the quote. When American Indian goes into isolation and and fasts in order to achieve a vision. The vision he seeks is not a romantic understanding of surface beauty of the world. Neither is it a vision of the world's classic intellectual form. It's something else. At this point, I think what he means by something else is an expansion. Let's just say you're in the Indian Vision Quest, or you were doing the Indian Vision Quest, or you were having a mystical understanding or a mystical experience, or you're in a peyote ceremony. It's an expansion of understanding through the pure dynamism of an altered state of consciousness. And when you come out of that, one has a new pattern of value. It's a layer added to your understanding. And you could call that an increase in wisdom. So you are adding another layer, another intellectual layer to your understanding. But how you got that understanding was purely experiential, pure dynamism, pure fresh experience. And subsequently, you become a more complete person, or you become a more evolved person, is probably what I should say if we're looking at this through a Pirsig lens. So I'm not in essay 3 yet of Genealogy of Morals, but my understanding is, by jumping ahead and listening to Sadler's lecture on the third essay, I think, Nietzsche thinks we ultimately need to incorporate both sides within ourselves, which makes sense from a Pirsig perspective, because the intellect has been evolved, and we're not going back. The intellect, is the highest level. But we can't live in the intellectual world all the time. Sometimes we have to fix motorcycles, and we should strive to fix motorcycles very, very well. So I hope that made sense, and I will see you next time.